to Mary. Okay. You're live now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Bournbrook and Selly Park online ward meeting. I'm not able to see how many members of the public have joined us yet, but we will be inviting questions on each item. But the first item on our agenda, as has been usual recently, is a COVID-19 update. And we've got Mary from Public Health here to give us an update and to answer any questions. So I'll hand over to you, Mary.
Unmute again. Image on. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, so COVID-19 update. I'll start with the general picture because we are part of a city, a region, a country, in fact, a world that is dealing with the pandemic, and so the perspective and context is probably really helpful at this stage, but I will zoom into what the situation is more locally. So as you know, this has been going on for the best part of a year. We've had a number of waves, and we are currently in a national lockdown, partly in response to the most recent wave of transmission and infections. The situation across the city is improving. Rates are falling. We've now crossed the sort of 300 mark, heading down, which is a considerable improvement on where we were even just a week ago, less than a month ago. I think the key feature that we're finding is that obviously we'd like rates to move down a lot faster. We would also want to see a reduction in transmission within the city. So the main means of transmission within the city at the moment is a number of places. Households, so within households, transmission within household is what comes up most frequently when we review in our contacts tracing information as to where people may have got their infection. The second thing obviously is that the workplace, so some people are picking up things either at work, on their way to work, during their breaks, or on their way back home. But for many other citizens, it's just that we need particular vigilance when they go out to the limited places we are able to go, such as supermarkets, doing essential shopping at the moment. So if I sort of just still on that sort of big picture, our testing rate. So we've got really good testing across the city. And we've got testing of different sorts at the moment. So many of you will be familiar with the PCR tests, which was the first sort of testing that was available. You could go to a drive-through facility, you could go to a walk-through facility, or you could order home testing. And that was for people who are symptomatic. And that is still available. And uptake of that is still at a pretty good rate. It's above 2,000 per 100,000. We do things by rate because that gives us a comparison that's useful. But in terms of actual amount of testing, it's continued to be available. We've got 10 walk-up testing sites in the city. At the moment, we've got one drive-through in the near the city centre, and obviously there's a home testing. And then in more recent weeks and months, we've introduced asymptomatic testing. So that some of you would have heard of the lateral flow device and the lateral flow test. So this is a different form of test that is particularly good at detecting people who may not have symptoms, but they are carrying the virus. And so it means that we can sort of nip it in the bud. And that form of testing is being rolled out across the city. There's community testing available. So there's some centres you can go to. We've still got a facility at the Utilita. We've also got spokes, but increasingly we're rolling this out through community pharmacies. And the idea is that right across the city, people will be able to go to somewhere that is reasonably local to them and get tested. This is particularly important for anyone who goes out to work at the current time. So at the current time, we're in national lockdown. We should only be leaving our home to go to work if we cannot work from home and that our work is essential, or in certain circumstances for education. And for people who have to go out to work at the moment, they would want some confidence that they haven't picked up a virus and they're asymptomatic. So you can go and get tested. In addition to that, we are offering testing facilities to any employer. Any employer that's got more than 50 employees can contact the government website, and we're encouraging employers to do so. So that will keep us safe as we go to work and give us much more assurance that we are picking up asymptomatic cases and getting this virus transmission under control. The next thing I'd probably want to touch on is our, we talked about testing, is I've got to, on the issue of testing, talk about Operation Eagle. I won't dwell on it, but I think, you know, I've just got to acknowledge it. So Operation Eagle is going on in the city. It doesn't affect the area of this ward, but it is in the south of the city. It's been well publicised why we're doing it. It's because there are variants of concern, and we just want to know how much transmission there is locally, particularly amongst people who may be asymptomatic. There's specific testing for people in that area. If you are concerned that you perhaps you wouldn't live in the area, but if you work in the area that's affected, which is mainly Franklin Park, a little bit of Northfield and a sliver of Rubery Rednall, there is a website on our website. There is a postcode checker, and you can find out if that applies to you. But that is progressing well. We've had a really excellent response from the people in that community, and there are FAQs, quite lengthy FAQs, and we continue to add to them. So if there are questions that you've got relatives or friends in the area who are concerned, please direct them to the website. If there's a question that hasn't been answered or isn't entirely clear, they can still come through to our BCC COVID line email, and we will improve our FAQs. The next thing I want to touch on is, oops, sorry, just scanning things here, is something about who's getting COVID at the moment. So at the moment, it's predominantly, we're finding cases of predominantly people of working age, predominantly people who are in the sort of 30 to 40 and 40 to 60 age group. It is in all ages, but it's predominantly those age groups. Highest would be 30 to 39. And that is classic working age group. It's lower in some of the higher age groups, but obviously, as you'd expect, it can be more serious illness. For inquiries about children and young adults, so children and young adults may be particularly relevant to your ward. Case numbers have fallen in children and young adults, but particularly so amongst the 19 to 21. So if we go back about sort of October last year, we had huge numbers between sort of 18 and 30, but particularly between 19 and 21, 19 and 23, so young adults. That would fit with university age group, many higher education. I do appreciate that many people in higher education are outside of that age range, but that accounted for a huge amount of it. And we've got about 10 universities in the city, and some very large ones in close to you. So I think that accounted for those numbers. But at the moment, I have weekly meetings with the universities, Birmingham universities as a whole. So that's, you know, Birmingham, UCB, Aston, all of them. And we keep tabs on how we're doing for numbers. Many students went home just before Christmas. We arranged testing so they could go home safely. Some students have had to return to school, to university, depending on the course that they are studying, and that has been allowed. That's under national guidance. we are being informed that some other students have also returned to school, and some have returned to campus. We don't fully understand why, but the feedback we're getting is that some of them were a bit bored at home. They've come back in, so some of those are on campus, and some are not. And because of the arrangements with regards to accommodation, some of it is not entirely under university control. So just looking at very specifically the situation that we have with regards to your ward. So just calling that up, see if I can show it on screen. Oops. Apologies. Yeah, okay. As I say, the rate overall is down just below the 300 mark. For Bournbrook and Selly Park, it ranks 48th out of the 69 wards, where 1 is the highest and 69 is the lowest. In the last 7 days, so we look at 7-day periods, you've had 30 reported cases. That's 30. And as a rate for the area, it's 1.22 per 1,000 population. Across the city, the comparison would be 2.6, so you're below half, and certainly one of the wards where it's lower. If we look at a 30-day period and look at who was affected there, even in your ward specifically, it is still predominantly the 20 to 39 age group, and then sort of equal for the lower and slightly higher 40 to 59, 0 to 19. Ethnicity, the mix is sort of 17% Asian, 9% Black, 4% mixed, but 50%, as you would expect, white ethnic group for the ward. I'm just going to try and share a picture because that sometimes says it better than I could. So that's sharing. Yeah, okay. So this is what it looks like by age group. Wouldn't surprise you at all. That's the situation the past 30 days. And I think that's really what we would be expecting to see in the area. And that's the ethnicity picture that I've just described. The next thing I just want to touch on really is COVID champions. So as you know, there's a lot of information out there about COVID, and sometimes it's not entirely clear what information can be trusted, what is reliable. So one of the huge advantages of being a COVID champion, and anyone can be a COVID champion, is that you get trusted information from us in the council. And I say it's trusted information, not just because we're the ones sharing it, but we can tell you the source of our information and we will check. And if there is an update or an adjustment by the people who do the counting and the measuring, they're pretty upfront about it, and we share that information as well. At the moment, the ward should have, to be proportionately representative by population, we should have 15 COVID champions, and we've only got 11. So I would strongly encourage anyone listening who wants to get involved to become a COVID champion. In addition to us passing on information, we also listen, and the listening is to find out what experiences you're having locally of COVID. We're all experiencing COVID in different ways, and it's really important that we get feedback as to how people are experiencing, what's happening with regards to knowing what to do, when to isolate, knowing how to get help. We've provided that information. We think we've provided it in as many ways as we can consider different ways, but if there is a message that's not entirely getting through, or it's not clear, or it's not as easily accessible as we might want, we'd really appreciate that feedback. Looking ahead to how we go forward with COVID, at some stage when the time is right, we will want to reopen the city. It's absolutely important for our personal health, but it's also important for the health of our city and our economy. And we'd want to do so safely. And when that time comes, we would really appreciate having as many COVID champions as we can to communicate from their communities and to their communities and their networks all the things that are going on and what else needs to happen and in what ways that can be supported and enabled so that we can safely transition through this pandemic to what we're looking forward to end the new normal, however that is then described. I'll stop at that point and take any questions.
Can I just pick up the point about students and some of the other reasons they may need to come back, which we've been asked about, and I'm very happy to confirm the description that's there. Some students just may not be able to stay where they've been over the vacation, either because of the circumstances of where they've been, which may or may not have been family. Everybody has different circumstances. They may need to be back here to access healthcare, including mental health support, and it may well be that at home or wherever else they might have been, there is neither space nor access to Wi-Fi to be able to continue studying, because classes are being delivered online, and I think assessments also happening online. I meet regularly with the university, virtually of course, and the Guild of Students, and the police are also involved. So we do know that there have been a very few number of people who have tried having parties and other gatherings. There are no special rules for students. The rules about not having people around apply, and ultimately fines will be issued if necessary. And we also ask people to be sensible when they're going out and about, and stick with their household groups or one other person. I was expecting more questions about the situation in Franklin and Northfield. I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, Kerry's asking if the information can be sent in writing. I think the updates are available on the council website. Mary, you'll be able to.
Yes, the information, is this updates about COVID generally?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, there is information about COVID generally on the council website, and that is updated. Yes, but if I could just also come back on your comment about university students, as I say, I've met with them, and this week the theme of our discussion, it was a virtual meet, was about the mental health and well-being of students, and each of the universities was able to say what they had done, what they were doing, and they did touch on, you know, the fact that for some students it's IT poverty, for others, in addition to school and studies, they've got caring responsibilities. For many students, especially our commuter students, they are working, so they're dealing with job losses and furlough, etc. Then there is the standard of, you know, it's not always possible to do the studying that they want to do at home. So some students come in by arrangement with certain universities, and they come in on the day to be able to do some studying, and that's an arranged place. It's COVID secure. So the range of universities have done some really good work. Their hardship funds, several have augmented their hardship funds because there's been that much drawdown on them. And they've been quite creative with apps, etc., for finding ways of reaching students. But they're also recognizing that in quite a few, the demand for counselling, for hardships, for support, etc., has been such that they're having to put in special arrangements even now. So they are looking at a range of ways to support students, and we agreed at the end of the meeting. I was so impressed with the range of what they're doing that I felt it needed to be showcased a bit more, and so we'll be putting something together, because Birmingham is it's not the only university city, but we've got quite a number of different sized universities with students that are local, students who commute in. We've got foreign students. Some of them were concerned about what support they could have if they needed to isolate. So all of that's being addressed in a range of ways, and I think we would do well to share that nationally, because we've got such good work going on in the city.
Okay, we've got a question that's actually for the next item. Does anybody else want to ask anything on the COVID-19 update? No, as Mary said, you can sign up to be a COVID champion, in which case you will get all the latest updates and can share them with friends and family. I'm not seeing anything. No, in that case, thank you very much, Mary. That's really useful.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would really strongly encourage people to sign up to be a COVID champion. I would really encourage it. We have got a long road ahead. And so the more input we have from the community and the more engagement, absolutely the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're very welcome to stay and hear the rest of our issues, but we'll understand completely if you want to go. Thanks. Take care. Right, I believe our next item is on how we move forward on exempt accommodation. Some of you will have attended the roadshow that Councillor Thompson held. She's now done the whole of the city constituency by constituency. I'll do the exempt accommodation 101 and then hand over to Bridget for an update on what's happening at citywide level, and then we'll take some questions. So to go back to the beginning, we have several types of houses in multiple occupation in the city, and that until recently, the ones that we spent most time discussing were the student ones. So there is nothing special about regulation of student HMOs. It's the same as other HMOs, in that if they're large, they require planning permission, since the Article 4 has been introduced to turn a family house into a small HMO. Also requires planning permission, and if they have 5 or more people, then they require a licence. So in this area, largely students, but some non-student HMOs, either young people who've moved on from being students in the area, or other people who are on low incomes of all ages, or on benefits where they can only afford that type of accommodation. What we're seeing increasingly is a different category, what we call exempt or supported accommodation, what we're trying not to call HMOs, just to get the distinction. These are houses shared by a number of people, where the operator of the property claims to provide support. Now, on some of the larger properties, this may need planning consent. It depends on the level of support apparently provided. some of the smaller ones don't. So that's one distinction between the exempt accommodation and normal HMO. They also don't need a licence, and both of those distinctions are not local decisions. They are national government policy. Bridget can take us through in a second through the way in which the council then has to pay benefits for these properties. Now, not all of those properties are a problem, but an increasing number of the ones in our area are proving to be a problem. And they're called exempt accommodation because they're exempt from rent controls, but they're also exempt from licensing. We don't have Steve McCabe with us tonight. He's done some very good work on trying to get these things changed at a national level. The question we've had is who decides whether a house can be used for supported accommodation when a street is already fully saturated with HMOs. And the situation we're up against is there is no control in that situation unless it's of a size or of a type of support that requires planning consent. There is not the restriction that we've had on other HMOs in the area. So I'll hand over to Bridget just to update us on what's being done across the city. As I said, Councillor Sharon Thompson, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing, has been round virtually the city holding road shows. And what we wanted to talk about tonight is how we work together to take these issues forward in Bournbrook and Selly Park. So I'll hand over to Bridget and then we'll come back to that particular point. Bridget, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So Karen has covered off the planning side of it. We can only say no to new places opening up for planning reasons if they fall foul of all of the normal things that cover HMOs. So if it get past normal HMO stuff, it gets past this. The second way we can we have interaction with these places is through the benefits system. So if you are living in exempt accommodation, then the idea is that you are somebody that requires extra support. That might be because you have a learning disability, or it may be because you are recovering from drug or alcohol treatment, or it may be for a whole host of reasons. When you live in this accommodation, you qualify for an enhanced level of housing benefit in order to cover the extra costs of running the place. And you need to be in receipt of extra support. Now, how much support should you receive? We have to, as a council, when you let me talk you through the steps. So first of all, a landlord applies to the council for each individual property and says, got my HMO, I want to turn it into an exempt accommodation. We want you to assess us, please. Council has a look at it and says yay or nay. Legal bar they have to pass in order to become an exempt accommodation provider is almost minimal. In fact, the legal term is you have to provide a minimal level of support. It is insanely low. So even if you're just popping in once a week to provide a bit of check everyone's okay, that can be enough to qualify you to be a provider. I think that's wrong. Karen thinks that's wrong. Most of us at the council think that's wrong, but that's where the law is at the moment, and we don't have the powers as a council to turn people down for providing shoddy levels of support. So if you qualify for that, then if you pass the minimal threshold, then your residents qualify for an enhanced level of housing benefit. The other thing to note is if you are a provider of this, you're not allowed to be for profit. It cannot be a for-profit organisation. So those are the rules around it. What are we doing about it? So first of all, we have a team that's checking over some of these providers and making sure that they are not for profit. And we've already had a case recently where we have removed registered status or managed to have removed registered status from an organisation because it was operating for profit. And what they've ended up doing is transferring their homes to other providers because, of course, there are still people living in them. But it's meant that they've had to exit the market. We've caught them out with our fraud team as being for profit. We also have our fraud team checking over these inquiries and just making sure that there is some level of support going in, even though the threshold is hilariously low. We are constantly checking this and checking there's no fraud in the system. Secondly, we're attacking it with a pilot. We've got some money off of government to do a pilot in Birmingham, where we have a multidisciplinary team with people from housing benefit, people from planning, people from the police, people from social worker, going out and visiting some of these properties where we've had complaints, seeing if there's a multi-agency approach we can take to tackling some of the issues in them, and seeing what we can do to try and help in those areas. If they obviously are providing less than the minimal threshold, we can refer them, or if we think there's fraud going on, we can investigate them further. But also it helps us build up an evidence case for the third thing we're doing. The third thing we're doing is lobbying government to change the law, because ultimately we can do all the enforcement we like, but whilst the legal threshold for what constitutes a minimal standard of care is so low, it's very hard to enforce much of it. So we are building up an evidence base, and we are lobbying the government to change the law in two areas. First of all, around benefits and our ability to assess whether or not they are providing minimal support, where we want to have rights of entry into these properties to assess. We want to have a really clear, decent legal definition of what support people should be receiving. And we want that definition to be at a decent level, because at the end of the day, these are very vulnerable people living in these properties and they need support for a reason. Secondly, we want more powers around planning. We want the powers to be able to stop more of these places from opening and stop them opening in places where we've already got saturation, because we believe in Birmingham at the moment we have more than our fair share in the country of exempt accommodation because, well, because we're a big city, to be quite honest. We have large amounts of easily convertible, cheaper housing stock, and people target us. We reckon we've got more than the city needs. People from outside are being placed here, and we need the powers to turn things down. So that's what we're doing. First of all, investigating fraud and taking action. We've already caught some out. Second of all, we've got our government-funded pilot to look at a multi-agency approach and build up an evidence base around this. And third of all, we are lobbying the government to change the law and give us the powers that we need to serve our communities. I should say with all of this, these are, again, very vulnerable people generally living in exempt accommodation. We're doing all of this for them as well, actually, because it doesn't help neighbours, but it also doesn't help the people living in this accommodation if they are not getting the support they need to get on in life and get through whatever issues have led them to need to be in exempt accommodation. So that's largely what we're up to city-wide. And I will hand back to Karen, I think. So I think there's a number of questions that are popping up in the chat bar there.
Yep. I'm not sure if this is one anonymous person or a number of people who are not identifying themselves. That's absolutely fine, whichever it is. But the first one is, do RSLs, which is registered social landlords, need to get planning permission if a property is to be used for 3 or more tenants in supported accommodation? And sadly, the answer is it's not that clear cut. Whereas for a straightforward accommodation only HMO, we're quite clear now that a new HMO needs planning permission. For this category, it does depend on the level of support. It's a subsection of a use class. So the answer is, if there's a property that you are concerned about, either go straight to planning enforcement and ask them to take a look, or come to one of us, and we will see what we can find out. And we can ask housing and other parts of the council to compare information. Kerry is asking whether the tenant in supported accommodation should have a care package which defines their needs and how they should be met. It's not a care package. In that situation, it would be a care home which would need planning permission. This is a support package, and as Bridget says, the category is more than minimal, and the legal definition on that is not great. But yes, they should have support, and if you're interested in this subject, then you've probably come across properties already where there's very little or no support, and those we can pick up, and as Bridget says, we can get the investigation teams on that. These properties tend to be multi-layered, in that the owner has then leased it to a registered social landlord, and typically they then bring somebody else in to provide the support. So it can be very difficult to pin any given person down. I know residents who have tried, and they're told it's not them, it's another part of the system. Again, if you let us know, then we can see what we can find out. They've got another anonymous. There were some joint visits from very problematic properties, but that was, I think, in the gap from between lockdowns. I will check whether they are going to recommence those. We do have to make sure that staff and the police officers who go with them are adequately protected. Right, where are we? What is, as I said, got the question, what is it exempt from exactly? It's called exempt accommodation because it's exempt from rent controls, but it's also exempt from practically everything else. It's exempt certainly from licensing. Licensing is really useful because it gives you a standard that has to be met on everything from size of rooms through to heating and maintenance. It's also, as I've said, tricky in planning. It's not as clear-cut as a standard HMO. We've got a report of a property in Langley's Road, which is not in our ward, but we'll pass that on to the Bournville and Cotteridge councillors. We are very familiar with Langley's Road from when it was in our ward, and we are very familiar with the way in which certain landlords have approached their properties. Darren, change of use from a family dwelling, let's not use the word normal, from a family dwelling to HMO or large HMO, with the Article 4 in place across the city now, from a family home to a small HMO, which is 3 to 6 people, needs planning consent, and a large HMO, which is 7 or more, needs planning consent either from a small HMO or from a standing start from a family dwelling. As I said, it's not as easy to say when a change of use is needed. For exempt accommodation. Right, I'm now getting comments coming in by email as well. So let me just check whether there's any more questions. I'm going to come back to the action in a minute, but I've just had an email from Sergeant Tressa Ludlow to say that they have been doing some visits to particularly problematic properties right, I'm going to look at the email. If I don't make it back, Bridget will have to take over. Yeah, Tressa is confirming that they have been doing visits over the last few weeks to a particularly problematic area for exempt accommodation. So that is a possibility if you are having problems. And as I say, if you are living next door or very close to a property of this type, please let somebody know so that we can investigate. If there's no more questions, yeah, somebody asking again about Langley's Road. We will refer that. It's not in our ward anymore. Really sad that's one of the areas that we lost a couple of years ago, but we'll make sure that councillors Clements and Grindrod get in touch about that. Chris, people are moving out of your area because of issues like antisocial behaviour from these properties. One of the things we wanted to talk about tonight was how we worked on this. I'm assuming you're Chris from Selly Park South. I'm now getting emails relating to properties that we have already picked up, and I'll pick up those afterwards. They're flashing up in the corner of my screen. Let me just pick up the point that I wanted to make on Chris's question and how we go forward. Selly Park South Neighbourhood Forum asked us about what was being done in Edgbaston, where the MP, Preet Gill, has organised a group across the constituency to talk about it. And we wanted to hear what people thought, whether that would be useful for us, or whether you wanted to look at it on a ward basis, or whether you wanted to subdivide. Basically, one of our thoughts was, should we look at Bournbrook separately, because there are slightly different issues with former student properties becoming exempt accommodation. So I'll hand over to Bridget for a bit to pick up some of the questions.
Thanks. So Karen's answered loads of these. One of the sort of continuing themes is what can we do? So as part of what the council's doing, we are trying to build, so first of all, we're trying to enforce stuff as much as we can. But the second bit is we are trying to take a case to government to tighten up the rules and the law around this. So a first thing resident associations can do and individuals is keep track of some of these properties, help us collect evidence where you think there is less than minimal support going into some of these properties. Let us know. We may not be able to take action, but even if we can't, if we legally can't, that's okay. It helps us build a case to take to MPs and try and get the law changed, and it all builds towards that. The really helpful thing you can do is maybe keep track of some of these things, keep track of some of the issues that you think are falling below standard, and we'll see if it's something we can take action on or something we need to be out there lobbying on. Just a couple more have come in, so let's have a look. Which departments deal with registered social landlords at the council? So when it comes to exempt accommodation, it is largely the benefits department that deals with it, because it is when you make the claim for housing, enhanced housing benefit, that you would you'd qualify as an exempt. Let me put that, sorry, I've been in meetings since 9 AM. So my brain is slightly scrambled. Let me put that in a slightly better way to understand. So a request comes in for from a landlord to get their house approved for exempt. It doesn't matter how many houses they've already got, they still need to get each individual house approved or property approved. It's the housing benefit department that makes that assessment as to whether or not it is more than minimal support that is being provided, and we check that you're not for profit. So that's the area that at the moment has the power to say yay or nay to these things. But as I've said, the bar that we're allowed to say no to is incredibly low. So it is surprisingly the housing benefit department. I think that's weird. Social work would make a lot more sense given what these properties are and what they're there for, but that's where the law puts the power around that. Bearing in mind people control are doing this to make money, please give us an idea of figures. So in theory, the people providing this accommodation aren't supposed to be making any money off it. They're not supposed to be for profit. Where we think there's evidence that they might be operating for profit, again, very useful to send to us. If you think, if you happen to know that they own loads of other houses that may be part of a profit-making enterprise, particularly with the larger ones. I don't know what the evidence would look like, but if you see evidence locally that you think it might be for profit or you happen to know, do flag them up to us, because we can look into that for fraud purposes, because they are not allowed to be for profit. Now we've got a question about why the council cannot use existing Article 4 regulations. So we can, but as we've all learnt with student HMOs, that only gets us so far. So that puts a cap on how many can be converted into HMOs. It doesn't cap them off completely unless an area is already saturated. The wiggle room that we have is set by national government. An Article 4 designation is one of the tools in the box we can choose to use that the government has created. We've chosen to use that tool of an Article 4 designation for the city to stop over concentration of HMOs. So no more than 10% of HMOs within a 100-metre radius of an existing HMO may become another HMO is the rule now, that obviously originated in Selly Oak and branched out into the rest of the city. But again, that only gets us so far because these are covered by the same kind of regulation. So if it would have passed the student housing test, it passes this test as well. What we need is planning law to change to give us the powers to say, no, we don't need that here. We don't want that here. That is wrong for this neighbourhood, but we don't necessarily have those powers at the moment. Article 4 can stop some of it if we're already at saturation, but it can't stop all of it because we don't have the planning tools in our box. And national planning reforms are threatening to take even more tools away from us, but hey, we're not the ones advocating for that right now. I think that's just about all the ones that haven't been answered so far, so I think I'm going to hand back to Karen.
Since we've got people from Langley's Road on the call, they are and have been brilliant at capturing information about changes to properties in their road. So if a property is up for sale, somebody will have captured the information and will be able to say now or at some point in the future who the people were that moved out. Will be prepared to vouch for the fact that it was a family home up to a certain date, and will know which other properties are HMOs. In terms of student and other licensed HMOs, that information is published. So if you're not sure, then that is on the council website. One of my favourite things about the HMO licensing scheme, though, is that information is picked up by HMRC every couple of years, whereas with these properties, as Leon has correctly identified, it may be apparently not for profit, but there are people making money at different levels of the system. So I'd be really interested, we'd be really interested in how people want to work together on this. Whether you think it's appropriate to try and work across the constituency, because certainly as far over as Brandwood, these properties are an issue, or whether you think we need a different approach for Bournbrook and perhaps then the rest of the constituency, or some other configuration that you think would work. Anyone got any thoughts that they'd like to put in the Q&A box while I just pick up? You can complain to us at the council, you can report to us. We can't stop exempt accommodation. You can write to Steve McCabe MP, who, as I say, is trying to get the law changed. What we need is the powers to do this, and at the moment we don't have them. I'm not sure if the question is about a particular property being exempt from planning law. As I say, it's not as clear cut as other HMOs. It depends on the level of support and how it fits into an approximation of a family home. But we can check any property within Bournbrook and Selly Park for you and check its status. So has anyone got a view on how we go forward? So what that would involve, some of you may have been involved in the past in initiatives about HMOs when we've brought people together. So we would virtually, for the moment, set up a meeting and look at what has worked elsewhere, look at where the hotspots are, talk about what information helps us take it forward. I agree, Saj, that it would be useful for neighbours to know. If they had to be registered, then you could look it up. The good providers do tend to talk to the neighbours and the rest don't. But you can always come to us and we will forward that information to the relevant parts of the council. If it's ASB, you can also report it to the police, and as you've heard from Tressa, that they do visits, they do speak to the providers, they do issue warnings. And we've got a question: what can stop supported accommodation? there'll always be a need for genuine supported accommodation. What we've got at the moment is something that doesn't work either for the people living in the properties or for the people in the surrounding area. So what can stop bad supported accommodation is those changes in the law that we've talked about, and I'll say it, vigilance from neighbourhood organisations and individuals. I know it's difficult, but you don't have to tackle the tenants first before you can come to us. We will obviously prioritise the ones where there is a problem with behaviour and with lack of support. So how about if we look at Bournbrook, including Dale North and George Roads, and talk to Bournville and Cotteridge councillors about Katie, Winnie, Lottie, Langley and Oak Tree as one, as the area where there's movement between bad student HMOs and bad supported exempt accommodation, and then look at the rest of the area with Bournville and Cotteridge and Sturchley. Does that sound logical? Oh, got something in the chat box. I have to switch tabs. Right, that's that's Bridget making. See, we haven't sorted this out between us. Wheelie and Selly Oak would go in that wider one, and we could get Steve McCabe hopefully involved in that. Bridge, do you want to come back in on that?
Yep. So yeah, so it's a issue that strays across borders, as Karen has said. So we have obviously concentration in Bournbrook of student turning into exempt. We know we've got issues, as some of the reps from Selly Park South have said, down in Selly Park along the Pershore Road, which tends to be other HMOs turning into exempt. The student issue, as Karen said, bleeds over into what is now part of the Bournville and Cotteridge ward, which is Oak Tree Lane, Winnie and Lottie. And interesting question, is there some in the Wheelie Selly Oak ward as well that might bleed over? So I think a good way forward might be me and Karen to have a chat with some of our councillors in the neighbouring wards, just have a look at where some of these issues overlap, and then let's look at setting up some sensible boundaries to work on this for. As Karen said, we've probably got two distinct issues going on. One is student market converting and one is regular HMOs converting, and they are slightly different problems. So it's whether we tackle them in separate groups or tackle them together. But either way, it goes across our ward boundaries. So probably a good thing to do is us, and obviously we know we've got colleagues here from Langley's Road, which is part of a different ward here tonight as well, because it affects them. So yeah, why don't we have a chat with our ward colleagues? It's been really helpful seeing the feedback in the Q&A box that you guys have given to us about where issues are. Keep feeding us your thoughts, and what we will do is get in touch with you probably through something like TP4 or so, or other contacts, looking at how we formulate groups to work on this going forward in the best possible way. How does that sound? That's probably a hand back to Karen moment.
Yeah, we can do that. We've got a really good question. How do the council decide when deciding on a house for supported accommodation? That's the one bit the council doesn't do. These properties are not commissioned by the council. There is no process for for that. Some of the providers even advertise for people with support needs rather than deal with reputable organisations. If we were commissioning the service, that would be another line of control that we would have over them, but we don't. Usually the first thing that we know about is when there's a problem. I'm not saying we can't do anything, but I'm saying that it's even more difficult than student and other licensed HMOs, and some of you will be aware how long it took to be able to do anything about that. Effectively, it needs every single possible approach to be taken, including changes in legislation. And Kerry's made a good point that if we are looking across the constituency and the wider area, it would be good to share examples of good supported accommodation. But as Kerry says, this is needed. People do need to live somewhere where they can get support. It's the volume and the pressure on neighbourhoods that's causing the problems. Okay, now I'm seeing something as one new Q&A. Oh, right, it's Chris saying yes earlier that's showing up as a new one. Okay, so we'll take that away. We'll talk to the Bournville and Cotteridge, Sturchley and Wheeley and Selly Oak councillors and come back to you with a plan and some dates to set up something that will help us to hopefully find some different ways to have an impact and relieve the pressure on neighbours of the worst of the properties. Right, last call on this one before we move on to the next item. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but really, if you've got a problem with an exempt property, please do let us know and we'll see what we can find out and which levers can be used to put pressure on the landlord, the owner and the care support provider. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else, so we'll move on to the ward plan. We did update this earlier in the year, or it may actually have been the last municipal year, but this is your opportunity to say whether you think the priorities in the plan are appropriate. Some of the things we're working on through the plan are parking measures, where we're trying to accelerate parking restrictions in Selly Park by using some local funding. We're waiting for confirmation that we can roll that forward into the new year and pick up another amount for that. You may have heard us talk about community infrastructure levy as well. Just to go back to the previous item, I'm not sure if our emails come up on the agenda for this, but we're Karen, spelt Karen.McCarthy@birmingham.gov.uk, and Bridget, spelled as it is on the screen, birmingham.gov.uk, and we will channel any complaints to the appropriate people in housing and or benefits and or planning. So did anyone wish to add anything on the ward plan? Oh, I was on community infrastructure levy, wasn't I? This is a sum of money that we've got access to. The council decision, oh, Case put the emails up, lovely, thank you. The majority of the money, it has been agreed, needs to go through a crowdfunder approach to ensure that we maximise what we can spend in the area. I have to say that most of the community infrastructure levy for our ward has been generated from purpose-built student accommodation. But having said that, it is about £130,000 that we've got, and it does have to be linked to what's in the ward plan. So once the crowdfunding process is set up, we will come back to you with a split, probably of a large sum to go through the crowdfunder, a small number of micro projects, and maybe something in the middle as well. But the ward plan, as I say, sets out the priorities, and the money needs to go on those priorities. One of the things we recognised when we updated it was the CP4SO projects around the old library and the housing project. We've got right, that's interesting. We've got two questions. Where does the plan come from? It's come from previous meetings and input from residents, which I recognise is a lot easier if you're all in a room and can pass around the post-its. And another question about how a neighbourhood development plan would relate to the ward plan. A neighbourhood development plan is a planning plan, spatial plan, and it has to fit within the city's development plan. It would be a little odd if it had completely different objectives, but as I say, it's a spatial plan, whereas the ward plan is a community plan. You can have both. You can have an economic plan as well, as some wards do, but they need to be broadly aligned. And just to say that a neighbourhood development plan is a huge amount of work. There's one going through at the moment for Perry Beaches, Perry Bar, and I forget what the third B is, and they've been working on that for years. Okay, Bridget's put up a map. The other thing, of course, is that a neighbourhood development plan might not be a ward boundary. It might be a different boundary. Bridge, you want control back again?
Thank you. Apologies. I was trying to send you the link to the ward plan in the chat, and instead I sent you the ward map, which is a different thing, but still very interesting. I've just sent you a link to the ward plan and priorities. Is the second thing I posted into the live event Q&A, so you can click on that link and have a look at it. As Karen's kind of answered already, what the ward plan is there for, we agreed it at previous ward meetings. This one we agreed back when we could meet in person. It's a little while ago, but it essentially is sort of statement of intent agreed by the community who come along to ward forum meetings, which back when we could meet in person was broadly reps from all of the major residents associations, and it's setting out what the key priorities are that you want us to be all working together on for the area. It's that statement of intent, and it helps guide the council in where we try to put resources. So, you know, we look across all the ward plans, for example, and if, you know, most of them have got litter in there, we know there's a citywide problem and bung some more money towards litter as part of an example. That's something we actually did in a previous budget round. And we can spot trends, spot, you know, issues, and at a citywide level, spot where we need to make other interventions. At a local level, it's a really handy thing for partners to, it's our guiding document, tells me and Karen what we should be focusing on, but also as a handy document for other partners who might want to know, you know, where to put community infrastructure levy, or, well, the old section 106, it works different now. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Anyway, so that's what it's there for, pretty much. I've sent you the link in the chat because I'm aware we've had quite a bit of turnover of representatives since we were meeting in person, and also obviously it's we've probably got a bigger audience tonight than when we meet in person, just because it's easier to come along. It's got the demographics for the area there and a bit of preamble about why, you know, what the ward is and so on, what bits of funding are available locally, and what they have gone on, and then goes into yeah, just some of the things that we decided to prioritise locally for us. So anyway, that's what the document is. How does it differ to a supplementary planning document, which we have for the area? That's very specifically about planning issues, what you want where and how, and we have one of those for the area, which was a huge amount of work and was delivered a couple of years ago, and that guides what should be built where planning wise. And then on top of that, something you can have is a neighbourhood plan. We didn't create all these levels of bureaucracy, by the way. This is government, we're just working with it. But on top of that, you can have a neighbourhood plan, which, as Karen said, is a much more detailed, legally binding planning document that you have to go through a whole number of hoops to get. It's got to be legally, because it's legally binding, there's a lot of evidence you've got to have behind it, and a lot of work needs to go into it, and ultimately it can only be adopted if the community votes to adopt it. You have to have a referendum locally on whether or not to do it, and that covers just planning issues. This is very different. This is what do we focus on now, in the here and now. So that's what we have. I'm going to hand you back to Karen now.
Thank you. And I've managed to, I thought I had, get the ward plan the right way up in order to check what we need to update. So priority 1 has been, since the start, housing and HMOs. So we need to update that for exempt accommodation. Priority 2 is waste and recycling. We particularly highlighted student move out day, monitoring the general service and the level of recycling, and dealing with those residents whose service still involves black bags. Although we weren't able to do the move in, move out activity last year, I think we'd still leave that as a priority. Priority 3 was community safety, particularly around street watch and joint working with the police. Priority 4, as I said earlier, was parking. Priority 5 was flooding. It's been great in the heavy rain. I think the alerts have only gone off once. I'm open to being corrected on that. And priority 6, which is the final one, was urban centres, and as I say, that included supporting CP4SO projects and noted the heritage work in the civic quarter. Right, have we got anything more on that? I mean, we could do a separate session on a neighbourhood development plan if there was enough interest for it, or we could put it on the next agenda. But in terms of those priorities, has anyone got any views on those other than a general update? Okay. Oh. Okay, I think planning's next, isn't it? Having lost track of various bits and pieces. Karen is also suggesting we look at Commonwealth Games, and in terms of making sure that we don't lose out, given that there will be 2 sports at the University of Birmingham. That's a useful reminder. Thanks, Karen. Okay, right, as some of you know, I have to opt out at this point. Bridget will and Karen's saying that we will get some grant money, so yeah, we shall work on that. Okay, James, thank you for that. I know you've seen the ward plan, so help with updating that would be great. Just double checking. No, that's Karen. Okay, I'm switching off while you look at current planning issues, and then I'll be back to Bridget then.
Hi everybody. Right, so for those unclear, the reason that Karen has just left us is because she is the chair of the planning committee. As such, she's not allowed to take part in discussions about the about open planning applications, because that would stop her from taking part in planning decisions, so we need to keep her separate. I, on the other hand, am unencumbered, and I can lobby and put in objections to things and put in supportive notes for things and represent your views, basically, to planning on particular applications. I'll put into the chat a link to the current open planning applications that are in our ward. I'm going to pull out a few that highlights and important ones just to flag to you, so it's on your radar. These are obviously decisions that affect our community a lot, and if you want to pull anything out or put in the chat anything else you think that I should be focusing on or any thoughts, please let me know. So first thing to note, of course, is, as always, an awful lot of the applications we get in this area are for minor alterations to houses, or sometimes major, to either turn them into HMOs or to expand them into bigger HMOs. These tend to fall, whether or not they get approved, other than general whether building quality, tends to come down to the rules that we put in place around Article 4 and around making people get planning permission for smaller HMOs. Those are both controls that we have brought in as a council locally to stop the spread of HMOs. So loads that will be subject to those new rules, like Article 4, that we have brought in. That's the bulk of the applications locally. A few of the key ones to pull out for you. So there is a live one at the moment, which I know Selly Park South and Darren and Chris have taken a keen interest in. And that is on the corner of Dogpool Lane and the Herschel Road. And it's the former BT phone exchange site, the former municipal bank building, which is currently a takeaway. And we have a developer who wants to turn that into a very large student hall of residence. I think around 167 beds off the top of my head. The local residents group have put in an objection to that, and I have fully supported that. And that's on the basis that we are quite a long way out from the university. By the time you get to the Herschel Road, loads of student houses in that area have turned into normal HMOs because students don't want to live that far out. So concerns about will it fill for starters, and then concerns about potential parking issues, although the developers, as always, say they'll tell students not to bring cars. How can they enforce that? Strong resident surveys in the area showed concern about parking, so we backed that up. Concerns about noise, of students returning late, taxis and deliveries coming to the property, and just the fact that it is wholly out of keeping with an area that is completely residential at the moment, and it's opposite a school as well. Just want to make it clear, I've been selectively quoted by the developers in relation to this planning application. They have quoted me as saying that I am in favour of the development of the site. I am in favour of the old BT phone exchange being redeveloped, because obviously it's a blight on the community, just having a big derelict building, and we've had antisocial behaviour issues there in the past and vandalism. However, that doesn't mean I'm in favour of this development, and that is a really important difference, because I support the local community in this, and I've been objecting to the planning application, been very selectively quoted in that. So it's just to make that clear. That application is still open, so if you click on the link I've put in the chat, you can click through, see it, and put in your comments if you want to. Another planning application to flag up to you is one where, two actually, where we've had planning successes recently. So in Bournbrook, behind the Selly Oak Nursery School, which is on Hubert Road, we have had a application to put in behind that a hall of residence. It will be taking up space that fronts onto the Bristol Road and is currently a sort of derelict Victorian workshop. Developers wanted to put in a hall of residence there, which would have taken up all the available space, overshadowed the nursery school, and been totally out of keeping with that. We've had a lot of objections, a lot of lobbying on that with the nursery school and parents, and we've managed to get that application turned down. So that is a success I wanted to share with you. And also just to share with you, it's not in our ward, but it's one of keen interest to a lot of people in the ward. An application was put in to put some very tall halls of residence on the Triangle site, which is where Sainsbury's used to be, just up the Bristol Road in Selly Oak. An application was put in to put a very large student hall of residence there. There's been a lot of objection from the local community, including myself, and that has been turned down at planning committee. They've still got the right to appeal it to the planning inspectorate, but that has been turned down by planning committee now twice, which is an important thing. I'm just scanning through the applications now to see if there's anything else to flag to you. The vast majority of them are general HMO applications. I'm just checking to see if there's anything else I should bring to people's attention over and above the sort of regular things. I don't think they're in particular. Oh no, sorry, of course the Selly Hill one is still open if anybody does want to comment on that. On Selly Hill Road, there is a application in to demolish the ex-servicemen's club there. So that's one to flag up to you as well. And that's one that again I will be putting in a objection to, and they want to put a student hall of residence on there. The reason for objecting, of course, is that the area is already oversaturated with student accommodation. There's no evidence that it links to need at the local university, we believe that students should be housed near the university that they study in. I'm just going to check the chat now, see if any of you have commented about any of the other planning applications or anything else you want me to take into account on this. I'm not seeing anything in the chat about any other planning applications. So if there is anything, do feel free to drop me an email. I continue, because this is what you have all told me in the community that you want, I continue to put in objections to things that are generally over-intensive student development, and continue to support you on that. If there's anything you particularly want me to talk to me about, feel free to drop me an email. Karen, of course, is in a very difficult position and cannot, or a different position, and cannot talk about these things, but I'm always available and always very happy to engage on them. So with that, what I'm going to do is send Karen a WhatsApp, because of course she's not allowed to be listening to any of this either. So she's whacked the volume down and won't know that I'm trying to call her back. So I'm going to send her a WhatsApp to ask her to come back into the meeting. and we will then close the meeting down, I think, unless there is any AOB. Right, I've sent Karen that WhatsApp, and she will no doubt come back into the meeting in just a moment. And nobody has posted anything else in the chat there. Excellent. There we go. Right, so I think we're just on to AOB and close of the meeting, unless Karen waves at me and tells me otherwise. And I'm not seeing any AOB in the chat, and I don't believe we have any AOB at our end. Just to say we miss you all. Me and Karen had hoped to start doing some walkabouts with local residents associations before the new lockdown came in. We of course have done a couple over last summer. Did one with Selly Park South and Derren back when it was very hot. I remember when it was, but I remember it was very hot. And we did one recently more recently with Selly Park Residents Association and the Avenues. We'd love to resume doing that again. We were starting to plan out a programme before the new lockdown came in and meet you in obviously a socially distanced fashion. For now, we will have to carry on meeting like this, but if there's anything you want to get hold of us for, if you want to invite us to your Residents Association meetings, just drop us an email. If you've got any other casework, just drop us an email. And we very much look forward to seeing you properly in the flesh when we're legally allowed to. But until then, big thank you to everyone. I'm going to pass back to Karen actually before I shut down the meeting because she is waving at me in a screen that only I can see and you can't because of the magic of Teams. So over to Karen.
Just a couple of things. One of them is, I know this way of holding meetings is particularly clunky, but it's the system that the council have. There is good news though. Karen Cheney has been working on us being able to use Zoom. So watch this space when we meet again. It may be in something a little more user friendly. The only AOB I can see is about planning applications in the avenues, slightly different angle on planning because it's a conservation area. Carrie is pointing out that there seems to be a long delay, which I had picked up on social media and I will chase up with officers. I'm not seeing anything else. So I think that's it for this evening. As Bridget said, we miss you all. Can't wait till we can meet in person and actually work on things together more spontaneously. You've got our emails. Let us know if there is anything you want us to pick up. And that just leaves me to thank the officers who've supported this evening's meeting. Kay has been moving you around, as has Karen, so that we can see the questions and deal with them. Thank you to them, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you. I think we're done.